Hello, so welcome to another set of thoughts from the Bible as we're continuing through a bit of Exodus as we're looking at Israel's exit from Egypt. So this week we're looking at Exodus chapter 8, verses 16 to 32. I am not going to read these verses for you, so please go ahead and hit pause. Why don't you grab your Bible and have a read of those verses and then come on back and we'll see and you can hear what's going on there. But it's better to read the verses before you hear from me. So this is Exodus chapter 8, verses 16 to 32. So here we find ourselves in the thick of the miracles of God to lead Israel to freedom from Egypt. Today this is just reading about the miracles of the gnats and the flies, the plague of the gnats and the flies. And the first plague that strikes out of these two is the plague of gnats that seems to strike Egypt indiscriminately. It doesn't clarify. It seems to say it doesn't matter if you're Jewish or Egyptian. This miracle, this plague, led all places to be covered with gnats. I love how the miracle is described, that the dust on the ground became gnats at the hand of God. In Genesis, we're told that Adam was made out of the dust in the ground too. The dust beneath us and around us might seem insignificant and just dust, but God can use the dust to bring life. He did so with Adam and does so with the gnats here, with the plague of gnats. And what's interesting, in both those cases, God was brought glory throughout bringing life to dust. Even our life came from the dust in the ground. So next time, maybe you're dust in your house, remember this: God can even use the dust on your shelf to create life. How incredible is that? What are the dusty parts of your life that need the life of God in them? Instead of asking God maybe to wipe the slate clean and start again, what about asking God to use the dust in your life to bring you new life? God can always do that. And so the gnats created from the dust cover everything. And there was no need this time for Aaron or Moses to go and speak to Pharaoh. It was clear that this was an act of God. Even Pharaoh's magicians straight away says that they saw this as the finger of God. I love that even the people who were supposed to lead Pharaoh away from seeing God couldn't help but point to God. Even sometimes the people who think will never point to God can always be turned around and see him. But Pharaoh's heart was hard, just like God had said. With the gnats not being big enough to sway Pharaoh's heart, this was followed with the plague of flies, but this time making it even more obvious that this was a miracle of God. Moses went and he warned Pharaoh of what was to happen, that like the gnats, the flies would cover Egypt, but this time there was a slight shift in the miracle. This time the land of Goshen, where Israel lived, would not be touched. A clear sign that this would be a miracle of God and that God would protect his people. And funny enough, the miracle happened just as Moses forewarned. This time, Pharaoh calls Moses in. It's time to make a deal. But Pharaoh's heart wasn't quite ready yet. He was ready to make a deal, but his heart wasn't ready to let those people go. So instead, Pharaoh offered Israel the freedom to worship God, but only in Egypt. Basically, Pharaoh offered a compromise. Sometimes when you've been praying for something so long and you're so desperate for an outcome, that when an offer eventually does come, you're so desperate, it leads you to take the compromise when the compromise isn't what you need. Sometimes compromise is healthy, and of course it is, but sometimes compromise does nothing to actually help you. It can look like help, but instead it's just trapping you further. Moses could have taken the deal. Israel free to worship God. Amazing. Yes, they would have had to stay slaves in Egypt, but they were free to worship God. But God didn't send Moses to make worship of God free in Egypt. God sent Moses to set his people free from Egypt. So knowing this call and this purpose, Moses refused to compromise. Why? Because to do so would have been, in this case, to turn his back on what God had asked him to do. Now, I'm not saying all compromise in life is bad. Sometimes when we're in a relationship with somebody, we have to compromise and find a middle ground. But we do have to enter these situations with an open heart, but also with a clarity of purpose, a clarity of call. What does God require of me here? If you can compromise and make a deal and still be moving in the will and purposes of God, then do so. But if the compromise means to compromise the call and will of God, then this is no compromise at all. It's just another trap. And if you're in a situation which is dealing with this, pray for clarity, pray for wisdom. Moses had the clarity and wisdom to see this offer as it was, not a meeting of the middle ground, because actually there was no freedom being offered, but actually it was just guaranteed slavery in a different way. So Moses, what does he do? He turns down the offer. And so Pharaoh then relents and says, yes, Israel can go free. And the flies leave Egypt and normality is restored. But then so is the hardness of Pharaoh's heart. And this must have been such a blow to Israel. They were so close. Pharaoh had come to deal. Moses stood his ground. Pharaoh relented. The flies left. It's time to leave. But no, Pharaoh changed his mind. They are denied in the last moments. Does this mean God has failed? Of course not. It just meant that God had to continue to work. God wasn't finished yet. Please, don't allow your situation or lack of movement in your situation cause you to give up. Keep trusting God. He can turn the strongest of tides. It just might not be time yet. So please don't turn your back on God. Trust him. Call out to him. He can still act.